binding properties onto things like links or images. It makes sense at first. You just bind it, anchor href there. But if you have like that second example up there, the username for like a profile link or something like that, that will actually go to like nowhere.com/profile until Angular actually loads the data. They have directives built in, like NGAN, so that it waits to generate the real href until the data is actually available. You don't end up with sending users to 404 pages or things like that. With images, it's actually a little more important because the browser will actually send a request to that bad URL, taking up a network connection and all that sort of stuff. So that's where the ng source and source set come in, so that it waits for the data binding to be completed. Another thing that we found in some of our code was, say you have a directive or controller or something and it's sharing data with some other pieces, or copying it out. So found some code that was basically taking a piece of data and copying parts of that data onto the scope, which kind of, if you're using two-way binding, that's going to break that for sure. Yeah, that will break your data bindings for child or parent components if they're sharing the data. So some of the things kind of listed out here is things to think about as you're doing that is your component or any of the descendants going to modify that data, and or even ancestors. If they're modifying that data and you're copying parts of it off, all those updates are going to be lost, and you're going to lose the data consistency throughout your components. Descendants binding the data listed there as well. And with the two-way data binding, unless you're dealing with huge pieces of data, that's sort of extra work to begin with. One thing, the event handling, one thing that kind of come up pretty quick was how do you get two components to communicate with each other? It kind of looks like there's not really built-in way that is obvious. So you have like scope emit and scope broadcast. But looking at the documentation, it's not real obvious what the difference between them is. So the difference is emit will send events, basically bubbling events up the scope hierarchy. So if you have a listener on the root scope and you emit an event from something on your component, root scope will eventually get that event. So it's a way to communicate up the scope tree through the ancestors. Broadcast works exactly the opposite. So you can broadcast events to the descendant scopes. Obviously, you want to be careful when you're doing things like that from root scope. Broadcast will notify every scope of the event, so you're going to end up with a lot of scopes being notified that the event occurred.
Damn bodybuilders, jeez.
So Yeah, there's a couple examples.
Yeah.
So this one is basically a global event bus. So this element emits it a bit off of root scope, which will send the bubble events up. On root scope, there's no more scopes to bubble up. So basically, root scope on this one is the only scope that is going to receive the event. So you have to actually listen on root scope down here. So basically, it's using root scope as a global event bus. In this example, basically broadcasting descendant scopes. We could use root scope broadcast to notify everything, but depending on the size of your app and number of scopes, that could be pretty expensive to do. So we were just using scope broadcast and notifying on this other directive. So that's basically the event handling. Another way you can do it, if you're writing directives and you know the structure of those, is to basically create an API on one of the directives controllers. So in this one, basically, we're going to have 3 directives. One's going to be the outer container. Then there's going to be a trigger, and then a content area. And basically, it's using the trigger to show or hide the content. So inside the outer container, we have a controller for this directive, and basically we're creating controls, stating a visible variable on there, adding some functions to controls, so you can set visible or set hidden with open and close. And here we're assigning it to this, so it's assigned to the controller. We're also setting it on scope so that we can access it from our templates and that sort of thing. So when we set it on this, that allows us to, in another directive, require that in. So this one says, give me the container controller from any of the parents. And because of the way we're structuring the markup, the container is going to be a parent component. And once we do the require, we can it actually gets passed into the link function. And we can access all those controls. So we can add a click handler and call open on that. So it's going to set visible to true whenever the trigger component is clicked. Then here, template, we're just doing an ngIf visible and then including whatever content is there. Markup would basically look like this. But that doesn't really give you any more options than the broadcast or emit, but it kind of defines an API for interacting with your component. A little more clearly defined. What's time?
Oh, yeah.
I have some more, but I mean, pretty short on time. Alright. So another thing here, let's see, I actually skipped that one. Scope digest cycle. So you see here, let's see, we're adding a click handler for a button click from the link function, which is going to be an event that occurs outside the scope digest cycle. So we have to call the scope apply, pass some function, and then set the scope variable that changes. In this case, we're only setting the scope or updating the scope on a condition. So we don't necessarily need this whole thing to run inside the scope apply. We only need to update the scope within that. So we could move the whole if event data condition outside of scope apply and only call scope apply if we're actually going to change the scope. Otherwise, we cause the scope digest, and that could trigger several other scope digests and things like that. So it kind of becomes a performance issue if your app starts to grow. So this is just rewritten to only run the apply if the conditions hit. This next one actually is something we did quite a bit. So a lot of the time you can hide or show components based on a condition. And the obvious thing is use NGShow or NGHide. That's fine for little things, but if you're hiding or showing a lot of content that could contain directives or controllers or something like that, you're going to want to use NGIF, which actually prevents that from rendering or being executed, basically. So if it's not visible, just don't render any of it instead of just setting a CSS class on it that hides it. So in addition to that, NGIF, they have switch. So in this case, we have like multiple different templates we could be rendering based on some property. So if it's A, we're going to render type A template. So you can also use NG switch for those type of things if it's more than just true or false. And it kind of leads into animations, which Drew is actually going to get into. So probably stop there, I guess.
No, go ahead. I'm not going to cover your toes.
So anyway, with JavaScript, this is your normal jQuery show hide, but Angular actually has that built in with the ng show and hide directives. So these are really meant not to show and hide things, but to animate showing and hiding things. So on this one, show and hide on mouse sleeve, and basically all you need to do is, it's triggered off a Boolean to show or hide. That could be an expression in your template as well, but basically it adds the NGHide class, and you can override the NGHide class for your component. So in this case, it's a tooltip. You just set the opacity to 0, and you can see the tooltip already has a transition set. So that there's several other classes you could use. There's like an NGShowHide or NGHide add. So at different stages of hiding or showing, it adds or removes some classes. Obviously, the CSS is going to be a little more performant and more ideal in most cases. So another thing we've run into is what happens when you actually need to, it's not events, but data that you need to share between components. basically, it's always, I mean, this is out there, like, this is, just write a service for it. But one of the things you might want to do is, if you have a service, what prevents multiple calls if it's something shared from trying to load that data if it's coming from the server. So in this case, you just have two HTTP gets, it loads the data, and sets it on root scope. And once it's on root scope, it's now shared. But if these run at the same time or close enough to the same time, you're going to end up making two calls, HTTP calls. So basically what we have here is a service. So it's going to say get the user, and we have this first call, initialize the null. This is scoped to where the service has access to it, but everything else has to go through the service to get it. And get user, we're going to use the promises using the queue. So first thing we do is check if the user is already there. If it is, we're just going to resolve the promise with the existing user. So that's the best case scenario. We've already got the user. Next thing it does is it checks, is this the first call? Or is first call already set? If that's the case, first call is going to be a promise that we create down here. So we're just going to assign defer to the first call and resolve multiple calls on the same promise. Otherwise, we actually do have to make the API call. So on success, we now resolve our promise and return that. Yeah. And when this promise resolves, we're just setting the user. We could really do that here as well. But this just illustrates that you can, on promises, you can actually have multiple components or listeners on it. I don't know if anybody's using A or D with Angular, but I actually have some stuff on that as well, but probably time.
When you go to Google and NGAnimate, their first hit is nganimate.org, and it sounds like it'd be a really great resource. I'd say skip it. Maybe you'll get something out of it. Personally, I didn't. But the next two are the documentation pages, and between the two of them, there's quite a bit of information on there. It's pretty much everything I needed to know to get started came from there. So NGAnimate, it's a module. It needs to be included as a separate script file. It's a dependency in your module that you create. There are a number of built-in directives that are already NGAnimate ready, such as ngRepeat, ngView, ngShowHide has been talked, and actually ngIf is also.
Really?
I don't know exactly how it works, but I imagine it works like everything else that we're going to talk about. When you can also use it to create animations for your own directives, and there's on the animate service there's enter, leave, and move methods that you can call that will basically get things rolling for you. And just as at a high level, when you call, say, enter, there's a whole list of things that happens. This one, oh, so on this doc page, here's the list of directives that that are supported. Also, with like, so move is only supported on repeat, basically. Here, this list under the documentation for enter, and those leave and move have very similar charts here. There's this I was hoping it was going to be a 12-step process, but it's not. It's very detailed, but the key things that you need to know are that, kind of what's happening over here. So the My Animation class is something that you've already put on your elements, and then when things start, Angular will add the NGAnimate class, and then it'll add the NGEnter class, and then it'll add the, where'd it go? NGEnterActive class, and then basically all that stuff is removed. And reflows, digests happen in between those, and that kind of thing. So basically, you set up your animations in those classes, and Angular, well, the NGAnimate will handle the adding of those classes for you. A real quick example in using the built-in, this is using ngRepeat. We built this out. This is without animation, but we've got a very simple Angular app that affects the model when you click those buttons. The code is right here. So we don't need to necessarily go over this. ngRepeat, it's smart enough to know that, hey, we are adding items to the model. Something's coming in, so we're going to call ngAnimate, or $animate enter. And when you take something away, it'll call leave for you. So we really just need to, excuse me, I need to get my cheat sheet. Write some styles. A little bit. Is that big enough? You guys do? Can make it bigger. It's big enough for me. So we've got the list item are the things that we're yes, everything should be on the list item. I don't know why I'm looking up there. It's a lot harder to type. So first we're going to put in a transition just so we can get our animation happening. And then what we want to do is get a little more specific. Say list item ngEnter. This is that class that will get added. First there's ngAnimate, but then ngEnter is added. ngEnter is basically sort of a starting point for the transition. So if we wanted to make sure that opacity was 0, this is the perfect place to do it. Oh, that's right. The 0 key doesn't work on the keyboard.
Long story.
Yeah, 0 here somewhere.
One word.
Make it 1.
We're going to make it 0.1. And maybe subtract 0.1. And then we want to basically in our another style, start this item, and we could conceivably do this ngEnterActive and make that opacity 1. The docs recommend that you actually get more specific by doubling up these classes. That's because depending on the way, the order in which they are, you could actually get one, the first one ngEnter overriding the other one, especially when you get into ngLeave and adding up some of these styles. Recommended way, in short, is to use that whole adding class, both of those class names. See that? Come back here, and I'm going to hold my breath, add the item. Oh, right, I forgot I got to jump right into style. Sorry, we got to add bring in NGAnimate and actually, in this case, we don't need to do anything other than bring in the module. Sorry. I've already got the script file included here, but we need to make sure that our module knows that we're depending on NGAnimate. I got that right. Now I'm all questioning myself. Which actually brings up the fact that things like NG repeat, they have sort of a default implementation of the animate things, which threw me off when I was going to write my first custom directive with NG animate. I had foolishly forgotten to include the module like I just did. Apparently I had some kind of chronic problem. But I was like, well, it still worked, like in the sense that things showed up or changed however they're supposed to be. They just weren't animated. Turns out there's a default implementation that is kind of stubbed in that you need to actually inject the module or else you won't get any of the fanciness. Remove item. Oh, there it goes. We haven't actually set anything up there. We can make it pretty easy by just reversing all of this and just adding a selector here for NG leave. But we want to, this is the destination, so this is our NG leave active class. And then same thing here, the starting place would actually be opacity 1. So we do one list item dot NG leave. And that should get us the animation that's going the other way. Few items. And I feel like I'm already past 10 minutes here, but wanted to, it's more fun when you get to do your own custom stuff. So if that's cool, we keep going. Objection. So in this one, I've got, there's actually 2 directives here, because there's 2 things I'd like to show you. Right now, they're not animating. This is the expandaroo directive, and this is the appendaroo directive. You can kind of see what they're doing. And again, the logic in the directives are probably pretty straightforward. We answer them. I've already got some styles in there to, we add the expand class, the width goes to 400. Sorry, was that a question? No, okay. You got something to say, man? Say it.
No, I was just saying you got a 0 there.
Oh, thanks.
Get it in there.
We're gonna need that later. And so again, I've already got the animate file being included, and let's not forget this time. Now, this time we need to use the animate service, so we're going to inject that here. We'll just do that down here before I forget. But one thing at a time. We're basically doing what we've had going on with the NG repeat. We're just appending items, but it makes for a simple example. So instead of simply creating a box and then appending it, well, let's skip that. All we need to do is call animate, enter. And then we got to pass it the element that we want to basically be appended here. That's the box. The element to which we want it to be appended, that would be the parent. I am blanking on what this parameter is, to be perfectly honest. And then if you want a callback function, you can write one in here. We can do the same thing here with, rather than just removing it, we can call leave. And in this case, we just need the element that we want to remove, and if wanted, a callback function. Is that it? We've got animate, we've got that call, and that's not it. That would technically work, I believe. Kind of works. We don't have style set up for it though. These are going to be basically the same thing. In fact, I'll go back over here. Grab that 0 while I can.
We wrote around, okay,
1 minute.
TED Talks.
0.
Ah, shit.
It's not listed on this.
Oh, you're right, thank you. I failed. Sorry, Dean.
I'll be drawn.
Hey, Brooks.
Okay. Can we have an extra of me? Just real quick though, the other thing I would like to have shown you is the other one, the expanding one, rather than just adding remove class, there's basically an animate version of that that doesn't do a whole lot other than what this is doing, except that it will reliably execute that callback function, which is great for cross-browser. It actually scans your CSS styles for the transition and delay and all that stuff, and it'll use events if it can, it'll use timers if it has to, and if you can't animate at all, it'll just go ahead and call that callback function. And my recommendation would be it's a more reliable way of doing that kind of thing. So go ahead and use NGAN. Okay, that's it. Sorry I can't get that box to fade in.
Front-end tools, Yoga and Bower. Basically, Yo is for Yeoman's for scaffolding. Grunt is more like building, kind of a build tool. Then Bower is for packaging. I'm sure you guys have probably already come across Yeoman generators for your own projects, but kind of doesn't hurt to go through them again. So, kind of show a quick demo of how we use it over here and how we integrate a module just to have us, some sample data from our APIs. So we can also create custom generators by extending the existing generate Angular generators and just add more functionality. So we over here have our own That's kind of some of our generators. This is the default generators Yeoman provides the Angular app, but we have our own generated Angular app, BBCom. It's kind of scaffolds the project, gets it up and running for you. A lot of stuff going on.
For those of you that don't know, Scott used to work here, and he had a big part in creating this generator, so if you see any bugs.
Look that guy.
This guy.
Yeah, I wanted to go back and fix them. You're busy.
Seems to be worse than that.
Well, as long as it doesn't download closure from that, we're good.
See, we don't, you asked all of that off?
Yes.
Just all that time.
So, what's this error? Can I see the mouse? Okay. Bad color for my intelligence. Okay. So I already have a test project here. I kind of just use some stuff of it to save time. So let's go ahead and import that project first.
What'd you call it?
I forgot. Quick start.
It's also
Okay,
project
so
or
now-
something.
Hit the refresh.
You guys take quick start anywhere?
There it is.
Ah. What did I say? Okay, so now we have that. So in our bar JSON, we can't remove what we don't need right now. So I'm gonna go ahead and remove. So bar JSON kind of pulls in all our dependencies. So I'm gonna go ahead and remove bootstrap, modal, we keep require. We'll just keep all this stuff for now, I guess. And then see if this builds.
It's just like bad asset fast, man. You probably just need that whole list file.
Huh?
Or just force through that process if it's
Yeah.
short-circuiting.
Yes. So we used to conscious some errors, but on force kind of forces you to build. So let's see if we have some kind of a page rendering from our initial generator app. Then we can start integrating our modules and render what we want to. Yeah, so we have something here. That's good. So the generator app, the structure is kind of app, and then we have our JS stuff and our controllers. So that's our kind of our controller. We can start modifying, try and inject our modules we need to render. So to add our module, we need to tell the bar know that we want that. So close that, and then should just take this. This is the kind of key module we need for this project, basically. So let's just use that. So now if you do web install, should pull our VBUI dependency.
Are you guys still using Artifactory to host your Bower components?
No.
This might take a while. Sorry for the wait.
Well, it's done, though, you go over like the grep file.
Sure. So, well, let's just go here, I guess. So, all the grunt tasks are kind of defined in the grunt file. When we do a grunt build, our corresponding functions or operations are kind of defined here. So let's find build here. There you go. So it kind of calls all this when you call run build. Not really super familiar with this file. It's more of a piece of Ben and Scott, but it's one of the most first starting step of starting off with the grunt and the build process. Basically takes care of the building and packaging. So won't be there, so just
one thing that Ben started doing that I've kind of been emulating as well, if you've dealt with any of these super, well, they don't start large, but unless you use a big generator, I guess they can. These grunt files can get super intense and really long. So it can be a real pain in the ass to go through and just configure one little thing, or just finding like where your port is on a watch or something. So what Ben started doing was using exports and creating a directory that's called like a build directory, and then just taking all of your individual tasks that are in your grunt file and putting them out into actual like node modules essentially. And then that way you have just small files that are like little build related files. And it's just a lot easier to maintain your project that way. And if you want to go and make some changes to some part of your build, you can just go and touch that one little piece that you want and not have to go digging through this mammoth JavaScript file.
And at some point, you could even, throw those in NGAN if you wanted to reuse them in multiple projects. If those plugins are always configured the same way or something.
yeah. So how much time do you have? 1 minute? Oh, really? Oh, wow.
Less than
1 second, 5 seconds.
Too much time. But anyways, I kind of have a project already done before, and it's kind of taking a while to download all this stuff. But So basically, you have your project. You get your all the components you need to Bower JSON. For require, if you're using require in your project to manage dependencies and the order of loading, you can have paths.json, which kind of has a reference to all the dependencies in your bar component. So when you're putting in any dependency in your project, and they're using jQuery or they're using BBUI, and they will all kind of reference from this reference point basically. So you want to get mixed up with all different kinds of versions or different dependencies. So yeah, that's the controller. Show the app.js. Basically has all the controllers and templates and routes. So what else? Basically, the app is started over here in the index.html. It kind of starts off the whole app. And then eventually, if you look at this controller I had, this is how you will pull in the module you need, and then through require, and then define it in the Angular module too, the pieces you're working on. And then that way you have access to it in the controller, and in the actual view, here, yeah. This is where the actual directive is used. I mean, basically, I should probably show you the directive as well, just to kind of show you how it looks like, so that you have an idea. So if you see the directive itself is kind of simple. It just has the service injected, and it makes the call to get the list of the most inspirational people. This kind of is a brief overview of how stuff is injected. Basically, require provides a way to integrate Angular modules, and then you can run them together. So if I can go ahead and run the app, the project I wrote before, hopefully, then I can at least show you what the data is coming back. That's good. So the module we're using is the most inspirational panel, which kind of lists out the most inspirational females or males. So right now, just making a service call, and then just printing it out without any kind of styles. So basically, it's a list of all the all the members, and service call is made on load. So
Does that do anything?
You did very tough.
Cool.
So yeah, it's kind of it. Sorry about the pauses.
Good, thank you.
Firestone team. And, so when you want Angular translate stuff, I'll show you some of the stuff here we learned today. So quick overview on like translation type stuff. On localization, a fun fact of the I-10N is there's 10 letters between the L and the N. Same thing with internationalization, there's 18 letters. Localization is mainly just like translating the content, whereas internationalization feels that there's more changes as far as the layout because of the translations. That falls into the I-18N. So we use Angular Translate to help handle the actual translations of content to different languages. I'll show you how we do that. So to get started, so you get all the Bower installs of all the different Angular Translate. You go and you, first you declare Angular translation dependency, and then you inject the provider into the module config function. And then there's three ways to translate. So there's a translate service, and it's not, it's injected per dependency injection. It's not the best way to translate because it's all within the controller, and that's probably the best way to handle that. Then there's a translate filter, and that's just a basic filter that gets applied to translate off that. And then there's a translate directive, and I'll go into more detail into these. And there's translate directive, and that's actually the best way to do it. And just use a directive, and just simply that, and you don't have the watch expressions that could get caused because of the translate filter. So the first one, they said this is a translate service, and it returns a promise that gets resolved with translation based off of translation ID. It's a little more complicated. The code's in controller, which isn't as good. And yeah, it finds the app controllers and servers to translate content. Second way is a translate filter, and this is better because it's independent of the controller. You can see the translations, the IDs over there. Right, and then the translate directive, this is the best, and it's a lot more cleaner. And you can use it, there's a little more flexibility with how you use it depending on how you want to use it. You can either use an attribute or as interpolation.
So can you go back, is that a directive or a filter?
What was that?
Is that a directive or a filter?
This is a directive, yeah, sorry. The filter is here so you can see on the top says headline that has a little pipe and translate. So that's using the translate as a filter. And then it's just tied to the headline, and you see below there's the var translations. That's where you set up all the little JSON type object there, which gets pulled in. So you can see var translations headline on the top where it says H1 headline. That will actually pull in what an awesome module. And then
On the next slide, there's a filter above, but then directives, there's
Yeah.
4 examples of directives below that.
it's either the paragraph, and I have a working example here pretty soon. Yes, this is the directive, kind of same thing, except for the top part, yeah, those are still the filters, but the where it says pass this text, pass this attribute, those are using the directive, which is still pulled from the JSON object, but the correct string gets pulled in. And also with Angular Translate, you can do variable replacement, and so you just set your JSON up with the same as before greeting, header string, and you just like in a name with the curlies. You put what you want to be pulled in there, so then you have P below P translate greeting, and then that would show up on your page as hi, my name is Pascal. So you get, there's a lot of opportunities with pulling in more dynamic data this way.
Are you able to format numbers and things in there as well, currency?
Yeah, there's way you don't have any examples of that here, but yeah, you can do quite a bit with this. And the coolest thing about Angular Translate is, of course, the multi-language support. So it just uses the translations method from the translation provider, and you can have as many languages as you want in there. You can see right here, this example, it has stuff for German and English, and then at the bottom says, you can set your preferred language, so when the page loads, you want to load just German, Spanish, French, whatever, you set it here. And then you can, with Angular Translate, you can change the languages at runtime. So first to do that, first you set up your translation tables and all IDs, so you have one for the English and German. Everything's set up there. And then you after you set the registration tables, and this here sets English as default language, and you get your buttons set up, and they will call the change language function. You pass in the language key, which you can see DE or EN. And this is the change language function, which just takes the language key and runs the translate function, and I have an example here to show you. So here's all the English, just hit German, translate on the fly, go back and forth. And if you look at the scripts.js file here, maybe nice thing about Angular Translate, as soon as you get set up so it's this far, you just create a whole, you can just add new language here, add a button for it, and it will just translate on the fly.
Is it just language, or can you pass in a locale as well?
What do you mean the?
Language country combination.
You could, we were kind of still working on that. I mean, you could, right now we're just doing the language for that.
Do you load those dictionaries in one in every page load?
What was that?
Do you load all the dictionaries in every page load?
Yeah. So another thing, probably the best way, as far as the example I showed had all the strings, the JSON files in there. This here is a static files loader, and this you could actually pull in multiple like JSON files. Have a JSON file for each language, and what that does is with the translate provider, you see the prefix and the suffix. You have all your like locale-en-json, locale-fr.json. This will split it apart, and you can use the, you can set the language key set up for that, so it's easier to populate the content with whatever language you need. Other language-related solutions is Angular Translate supports fallback languages, which is good. So if you're missing strings, let's say you have all the English strings, missing German strings, this will make sure there's no broken strings anywhere. There'll always be something there. Language negotiation. So let's say your browser is looking for en-us for the language, but you are your file's en. This will figure it out. I mean, that translates pretty good to figure out what it should be to get the correct language in there. Part of that, though, is you need to have the determine preferred language function there, because that to see what window navigator pulls up as far as available languages. And then another thing Translate does is cookie storage and local storage, which is pretty handy. So each time you go to the page or go someplace else, it doesn't default back to your language. It'll say what your last settings were. And then also unit testing. Angular is good for unit testing, except for on the site, it does mention the issue with asynchronous loaders that used along with Angular Translate. Gives you errors. So they have workarounds on the site you can look at and have links I can give you guys to Angular Translate. To get around that, other than that, everything's unit testable. And just a quick wrap up. Angular Translates is super easy. It's an efficient way to translate. Quite a bit of leeway as far as how you want it, which type of translate service, the directive or the filter, whatever suits your needs. You can pick what you want. Stack JSON files help a lot as far as managing all the languages you need to have on your site, and it has like things for fallback language, cookie storage, local storage, and unit testing can handle that. So I think that's it.
Our own kind of localization strategy. It's basically the same thing. It uses filters as a way to quickly transform any IDs into any language. We've also found it useful for translating, like for instance, you might store some data in your database. It might not be exactly display ready, so we kind of also do it there too. For stuff like statuses, you could do like colors or anything like that. We do a lot for at HP we're dealing a lot with printers, so we do a lot for like inks and supplies and stuff like that. But anyways, so just a quick overview. It seems like everyone has a pretty good knowledge of filters here. So there's kind of the inspiration was looking at what Angular provided. A lot of things there, like filter, order by, limit to, mostly used with like repeaters and whatnot. But also things like data are really great for formatting. So we thought, hey, might as well try this to do the localization with filters. So a couple things I like about filters, obviously works with data binding. Anytime your expressions change, you're going to get updated values local to the app, so you don't have to muck around with your controllers or services. You can just use them whenever you need to. Also, they're extremely flexible. It's just a function that you can do pretty much anything with. Yeah, so here's just a quick idea of what filters is. Seems like I said, like everyone kind of knows about this. So yeah, we had basically a couple different localization problems. One of the main ones was that we had essentially we want to have some sort of description or some way to communicate an issue. Maybe it's like an error or anything like that, and it's going to be kind of like a paragraph kind of thing where you want to plug in possibly a variable. So in this case, we say we have a user that we want to greet to our app. We want to say hello, Bob, and welcome. But the problem is Bob is French, so you can't understand this awesome greeting. So this was kind of what we envisioned we could do. It's obviously very similar to the localization provided that Matt talked about. So yeah, so the idea here would be that we could just pass in our string ID, which is the greeting, pass in, run it through our localized filter, and pass that localized filter the username. And so this is our very basic implementation for this case. You might have, so for instance up here, this is not exactly how we do it. One thing that we do both server-side and client-side localization. So so on the server we have to know which language we're localizing to. So instead of using a constant, we actually load our map via just a JSON request. But it'd basically be pretty much the same thing. What you want to do is just pass in your string map into your filter. We use a couple different methods, but one way we're leaning towards now is kind of using like either percents to kind of specify just basically like basic string formatters. So you can pass in any variables. In this case, the greeting we used, we're going to pass in Bob. So one other use we found is that a lot of times we store our data. It's not localized. It's not even really ready for display in English, really. It might be attached to some sort of enum or something that you have to find server side.